Okay, good afternoon. Before I start, thanks to Chris, who sent me an email to remind me. I brought all of the past graded midterms and labs. So Alma said I'd have them. See some of us after class if you're among those who haven't collected all of your graded labs and midterms. Today, we're going to talk finally about the economic consequences of immigration. This is a topic that we have at least touched on a little bit in terms of the Industrial Revolution. But today I want to turn to the current debate. When immigration is discussed, one of the key issues is the economic consequences of immigration. There are also fiscal consequences, by which we mean the balance of taxes versus services. That's an issue we probably won't cover. I'd like to cover it, but we're going to have our R&R week instead. But to summarize it briefly, when you really the key point about the fiscal balance, not the economic consequences, but the fiscal balance, is that to do it right, you have to look at immigrants and their descendants. And if you go enough generations, the descendants of immigrants look like everybody else. So the fiscal consequences ultimately wash, meaning in terms of taxes paid versus services. So anyway, we're not going to go into that in detail, but just remember that immigration cannot save Social Security. Let's turn instead to the economic consequences of immigration more broadly. According to surveys, most college-educated people tend to view immigration as beneficial to the United States, at least relative to people who are not college-educated. Part of that may be because of courses like this, and it also may be because educated people are more likely to be swayed by such factoids as 2/3 of graduate students in engineering and computer science are foreign-born, 25% of U.S. patents are held by people who are foreign-born, 1/3 of U.S. Nobel laureates in the sciences over the last 15 years are foreign-born, and places like Silicon Valley have a lot of people who are doing a lot of good things who are foreign-born. It may also be that people with college educations are in general less threatened by change and less threatened by people who are different, or it may be that people with college educations really like ethnic restaurants. I don't know. There's also, however, an additional possible explanation, and that is that immigration might really be good for people high up on the education distribution and not so good for people less high up on the income distribution. That's one of the subtexts of what we're going to talk about today. The main points today are that the U.S. economy has changed rather dramatically since mass immigration restarted in 1965. Some of the two most significant changes, at least the ones that we'll talk about today, are wage stagnation. That is the typical wage rate has not risen as dramatically after 1965 as it did before. And inequality, measured in various ways, has risen quite dramatically. That is, the richer people tend to have a higher proportion of the stuff. And that's also a very big change. The fact that these two changes seem to have, that these are, looking at the current time, is the result, these two changes, inequality and wage stagnation, seem to have started about the time that mass immigration restarted, after the 1965 Hart-Celler Act. It makes one want to ask, might immigration have had something to do with it? And that's what we're going to talk about today. The short answer is maybe. It's not easy to measure, and probably not. Probably not. It probably doesn't play a big role. In the end, I will have explanations that I think are better, but the book is open. The jury is still out on this. This is something that is still, I think, a matter of debate among academics and certainly a matter of debate among politicians. We're going to start our discussion today with a simple neoclassical model that takes a look at a simple neoclassical economy and gives us an answer, and then we're going to take a look at whether we think that answer makes sense or what we can really take away from it. And then we're going to go off and look at other reasons why changes in economic conditions might have led to these two changes I talked about, the inequality and the wage stagnation. Okay, so let's start then with the neoclassical trapezoid. This is a simple economy. Those of your econ majors, I'm sure, are accustomed to seeing geometric shapes and being told this geometric shape is the economy. It's an economy in very much an oversimplified sense. What it is we're looking at the quantity of labor, essentially the number of workers, on the x-axis here, and we're looking at the output per unit of labor on the y-axis. And the top line there shows that as we increase the quantity of labor, the marginal productivity falls. Right? So as the output per unit of labor falls as we increase the quantity of labor. That's because we're keeping the quantity of capital fixed, and in this very simple model, output comes from only two things, capital and labor. Right? It's a simplification, but hopefully it captures some the spirit of how an economy might work, at least for when we're making a small change. Okay? So the idea is that this trapezoid represents all of the stuff produced. It's the quantity of labor times the unit output per labor, mixed invisibly with all the capital, which never changes, and you get this measure output. The area of this trapezoid is the quantity of output, the GDP, if you will. The pink part is the part that labor gets to keep. Okay? And the reason is that the output per unit of labor of the last person hired determines the wage rate. So as you keep hiring people, if you're the capitalist, you're willing to pay less for the next unit of labor because the next unit of labor produces less output. Right? If you're in the business of digging ditches and you only have one shovel, right? One worker, the output per worker falls if you had two workers and one shovel. May produce more than one worker and one shovel, but it doesn't produce twice as much as one worker and one shovel. See the idea? And the whole economy is kind of that simple. Capital is like a shovel and labor is like labor. All right? So that's the point then that determines the wage rate. If the wage rate times the quantity of labor hired, then that's the pink part, and that's the wages. That's returned. That's what labor gets. The blue part on top is what capital gets. Capital gets what everything sells for minus the wage bill. And everything sells for the value. There's only one value, and the value is the unit of labor. Right? It's a simplification, but you follow that? Does that make sense? Are there questions about that? Okay, so we've got some assumptions here. We're assuming constant returns to scale. We're assuming that there's only the capital and labor ratio matters. Right? So that means that if we added another worker and we added another unit of capital of exactly the right proportion. In other words, if there are 7 units of capital per worker in this economy, and we add one more worker and one more unit of capital, wage rate won't change. Everything would just, what would happen? Well, the wage rate wouldn't change. The economy would just grow a little bit. That's all. And we're assuming that labor is undifferentiated. There's just one kind of labor. Everybody's the same. Now we can ask the question, under this extremely simplified view of the world, what happens if we increase workers? We increase the number of workers, we increase labor. In other words, we allow for immigration. And we get some dotted lines in the picture. Because we are keeping capital fixed, crucial assumption, it means that the wage rate is going to fall, because the workers that we add, or at least the last worker that gets hired now, will have a lower productivity than previously, simply because there's less capital per worker, and the capital labor ratio is the only thing that matters. Okay, fair enough? Okay, so we get some new dotted lines. We also get a larger trapezoid as a result. So that the economy used to be comprised of only the pink area and the blue area. And all of these hatched areas, the brown area, the yellow area, all those are new. Those are all the result of adding another unit of labor, without adding this much labor, I should say. In other words, of immigration. Okay, so the good news is that we've added people and the GDP has risen, so hey, immigration is good for the economy, right? Well, maybe. There is an increase, but the vast majority of the increase, or at least a very large amount of the increase, is simply labor costs. And so this accrues to the immigrants. Right? So we added immigrants, the economy grew, but a lot of that just goes to the immigrants themselves. From the point of view of natives, that is a wash. Right? If you let immigrants in, they come and they do work, they earn money, big deal, they keep it. All right. But there's another piece that is important to the natives, I mean, the people who were in the country before immigrants arrived, and that's this hatched part. This hatched part is the part that used to be labor, used to belong to labor, but is now going to belong to capital. I'm sorry, I misspoke earlier. The original economy was the blue plus the pink plus the shaded area. Okay, so that's where the economy was before. Now that's not quite right either, because there was a little corner of that missing too. Sorry, you can't really see. In this picture, you can see that there's a little triangle that's added, and the brown part is added. The rest, the previous economy is the pink and the blue. In this picture, the new economy has just these two parts. Okay, sort of. The point is that this crosshatch piece is the part that used to belong to labor. That used to be part of the wage bill, but now it's going to go to capital by the simple mechanism of the wage having fallen. So the wage fell. That means all the workers get a little bit less. Immigrants get some, they take it home. Workers prior to immigration lose some, they give it to capital, and that little yellow triangle is the immigrant surplus. That's the part of the economy that doesn't accrue simply to the immigrants and wasn't there before immigrants arrived. So that is so the question from the point of view of the people who will decide whether or not we should allow immigrants. That's the benefit, is the yellow. And note first that it is not terribly large, and second that it does not accrue to workers. It accrues to the owners of capital, and that makes a certain amount of sense because capital in this story is fixed, and labor supply has expanded. Right. If we want to put some numbers on this, we can pretend for a moment. Well, we don't need to pretend. We can use estimates. There are about 145 million employed persons in the labor force, at least there were last year, and about 13% of the population is foreign-born. Now it's probably a higher proportion of workers that are foreign-born. So this is a little bit of an underestimate there. But that would mean that the change in workers is maybe 19 million. Right, so there are 19 million foreign-born workers. But I'm saying it really should be a little bit higher than that. It won't matter. The average wage was about $32,000 in, I think those are $2,007. I'm not certain. And the slope of this line, estimated by economists, is about 1/3, right, which is negative to say negative 1/3. Right? So the area of this triangle then is 1/2 times 19 million times 1/3 of 32,000, about 1,300, which comes to about 13 billion. 13 billion almost sounds like money until you compare it to the size of the U.S. economy, which is around 14 trillion. So 13 billion out of 14 trillion is like 0.1%, something like that. That's fairly small. Using the same rough thumb rules in arithmetic, we can calculate the area of the crosshatched piece, and that would be about $174 billion. It's still not a huge amount of money, but it's more than the surplus. Okay. And that's the important lesson. This part, the transfer, the redistributive effect, is probably bigger than the surplus, and the surplus is not very big, right? So neither of them effects are very large. But if you wanted to pick an effect to be concerned about, it's going to be the redistributive effect. And this is sort of hinting at what we were getting at before. You can't quite see it yet from this story, but to the extent that the college-educated people tend to be more the owners of capital than purely wage workers. And if you generalize the idea of capital, like you did for your lab, we had ethnic capital, you could generalize the idea of human capital, and you could also take into account retirement accounts and savings, and there are all sorts of ways in which more people are owners of capital than just Bill Gates, right? And to the extent that the more educated people are in that category, or see themselves in that category, that might be somewhat of the part of the story of why, I was saying before, why it is that more educated tend to see immigration in a more favorable light. But there's more to the story. There's much more to the story than that. Now, historically, during long periods that we've seen, say, going back to 1860, I think we've seen this graph before, wages have risen. I'm looking at 1860 to 1930. Over 1930, this is sort of the end of a lot of large-scale immigration with the finally implementation of the 1924 Act and the Depression. But it's, there's some wiggles in it, but then this is historical estimates. But we're seeing wages rise. What does that mean when we have a model that says increases in immigration will lead to a fall in wages? it could mean the model is just all wet. It could also mean that when you look over a long period of time, this is really a nonsense because our assumption of both constant returns to scale and a fixed capital are clearly silly. Between 1860 and 1930, the U.S. economy grew a lot, and population went from probably 40 million to 150 million or so. Anyone know those numbers here, demographers? In any case, the population grew a lot, so these would be non-marginal changes. And on that scale, certainly size matters. Right? When we started to see the Gilded Age, the massive production of steel, and that steel had to go somewhere. You had to be building railroads in order to have the demand for steel that justified the huge investment in those big steel plants. And that was all the way back in the late 19th century. It's only gotten more so since. Countless industries couldn't really exist domestically unless there were domestic demand. The automobile industry in the U.S. Clearly worked well during a large part of this period because it could sell domestically. Right? So on the domestic side, on the consumption side, there are important effects of scale that are ignored in this. They're ignored in that story, and on the production side as well. Right? So in the big picture, but still, if you're talking about the question of what about allowing a little more immigration this year, this model may be more defensible. It is conceivable, in other words, that this model works in the short run for small changes, but at some point when you make big changes, different things happen. Okay? Is that a reasonable story? Okay. In addition to the scale question, we want to worry about fixed capital. Even in the short run, some immigrants may bring capital. That could be a different story. We're going to mainly be discussing the impact. Most of the debate about the economic impact of immigrants is about the economic impact of poor immigrants rather than wealthy ones. So this doesn't usually figure into it, but might want to keep that in the back of your mind. Network effects is something that's potentially very important, but it's almost never discussed. What I mean by network effects are the fact that the United States may have a lot of people with ties to foreign countries, ties of trust, I should say, close relatives, close friends, people with whom business decisions can be made. This could be important, but it's very hard to measure. It doesn't fit well at all into the neoclassical model. There's an interesting study recently I read about by William Kerr, who looked at the last names of people filing for patents in foreign countries. And he found that far more than would be the case from pure randomness, foreigners filing patents in foreign countries referenced researchers in the U.S. with similar ethnicity, about 30 to 50% more than chance alone would suggest. So that doesn't really tell us how strong this effect is, or whether this really undoes the neoclassical model. But it is suggestive that there's something to that the U.S. might benefit by being a hub, by having lots of entrepreneurs from different places. You don't know, but again, it's one of those things that you can't put into the neoclassical model very well, and so it's ignored. Undifferentiated labor is, however, one that we can talk a little more about. What if labor isn't all the same? Remember the story of the Chinese on the railroad, the indispensable enemy story, where we asked the question why, given all the prejudice and all the mean things that Californians did to the Chinese in the 1850s and 60s, why did they allow them to work on the railroads? And part of the explanation appears to be that it worked well for the non-Chinese who were working on the railroads, because there was we might say complementarity of skills. In that case, this was probably simply the effect of prejudice. But the Chinese workers got the lousy jobs and tended to elevate the white workers into supervisory jobs. That may not have been due to complementary skills, unless being able to speak English well and having a light complexion is a skill, perhaps. And then there's also immigrant selection. It could be that in order to get up and go and leave your home, you have to have a certain amount of get up and go. This is another issue that's difficult to quantify, but there may well be something to it. Today, with communication networks being what they are, it may well be that immigrants who perceive a high likelihood of success may be the ones who are more likely to come, and so we may have a positive immigration selection effect. In summary, though, I think what we must take away from the neoclassical model is that no matter what we think about complementarity of labor and so on, we really have to consider that in order for things to improve, you still have to have some wage changes. Right? Under a complementary scheme, it still looks like you're going to have wage changes. If you don't have changes in wages, things aren't going to be done differently. And if things are not done differently, you're not going to have gains, not going to have change. Does that make sense? That's a really important point. And I think that's one that's hard to get past. It doesn't really rely on a lot of the assumptions of this neoclassical story, but the neoclassical model we looked at kind of illustrates that. Right? Now, one of the ways you can see that is, right, if immigrants come with this